Oh, it's, yep. It's 6 o'clock. We'll call this meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read the call.
Dear Supervisor, please be advised that the Trumpealeau County Board of Supervisors will meet at 6 p.m. on October 14th, 2024 in the County Boardroom. All County Board members' claims are due in the County Clerk's office by noon on October 4th, 2024, so they can be prepared for Audit Committee approval. And you all did that. That was very good.
Certify open meeting law requirements to be met with proper posting and notification.
Yes.
Roll call.
Bridget Turner.
Here.
Stacy Klein.
Here.
Richard Seisha.
Here.
Lori Severson.
Here.
Andy Todd.
Here.
Richard Anderson.
Here.
Kevin Adams.
Here.
Dick Miller. Here. Kevin Whalen.
Here.
John Austin.
Here.
Don Waldera.
Here.
Robert Becker.
Here.
Renee Lyon.
Here.
Kellen Nelson.
Here.
David Larson. Jeannie Nutter.
Here.
And Ron Johnson. Here. Perfect attendance, 17-0.
Okay, we have a 6-item agenda looking for approval.
Move to approve.
Motion by Supervisor Turner, second by Supervisor Nutter. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, it's carried. Let's see, item 6? No. Presentation on budget.
I think that's got to be Dawn.
What's that?
Can you mute?
Hear your papers rattling, I was just saying mute.
Sure, but I wasn't making any noise.
Maybe it was somebody else. Debbie Foss, I don't know, somebody over there.
I was looking to see if anybody is on. Oh.
Okay. Well, I apologize if you've already heard this before, but you get to hear it again, and hopefully it's just as riveting as the first time. If you have questions, though, as we go, please feel free to ask. And those of you that have already heard it before, I'm sure that you will have maybe additional questions. I want to thank Paul Severson for all of his work, for all of the department budgets and everything that he's pulled together, not only this year, but throughout the years. He's done a phenomenal job, and he's put us in really good financial standing so that we can have good conversations. Even though we still have problems, I always blame it more on the state than anybody, right? Because of our fantastic levy rules that we have. So also want to thank Stacy Silla for all of her help, and Amy Bergerson for pulling all the data together and keeping on top of that. Really appreciate all their work. And then, I have to put a plug in for Steve Corbell and Mike Konecki from Government Solutions. They've been fantastic to work with, have given a lot of input and talking about some things that you'll hear about specifically with the Highway Department and how we work and how we keep track of our highway funding. Also, Brian Riley from Ellers, who's, again, you've been working with him for a long time, but it's been my pleasure to work with him throughout this, and so he's been very helpful as well. And then, of course, can't say enough about our department heads. I have been so impressed, and I love working with everyone here. I'm just very, very thankful. They attended the Executive Finance Committee meeting, which normally they wouldn't do. They would only be here tonight, but because this was like kind of the first process that we've been through, they attended that as well. Next year, you wouldn't see them at the Exec Finance Committee meeting. You'd only see them here. But I hope that they're here tonight as a resource. If you do have additional questions specifically to the budget on questions for them, they can answer those as well and be here as a resource for us. So as I kind of mentioned, we're talking about this state levy limit that's broken. We've been dealing with this issue for a while now. It's been in place for 20-some years. And really what was put into place as a good thing is thinking about how we can control spending has actually created a lot more problems. And then you throw inflation on top of that, and government entities are really struggling to figure out how can they pay people what they need to pay, as well as contract with the contracted services that we need and pay for supplies and work within this system. So just as a, oh, I had this working. Hold on one second. There we go. Here's my thank you. As just an overview of what we'll do tonight, we'll go over this budget process timeline. We're going to talk about our county fund review and department budget overview, new position requests, position changes and reclassifications, and then upcoming capital projects. Some important topics. So just to touch on real quick on our outline as far as timeline as we took and started here. It's been fast and furious. As you know, I've come in kind of late to the game. Normally, again, this has a May start. We're going to start earlier next year where we start some of these conversations and start before this. But I think we've done really well where we're at right now for the time crunch kind of that we were under. And again, that goes to speak for all of the staff here and everyone that pitched in and made that happen. So we're up to October, and so October 14th, we've got this budget workshop. Just to let you know, you're going to hear all this information tonight. I want to get a little bit of feedback on from you on a couple of things that were brought up at the last meeting at Exec Finance, and then we're going to present. It'll just be on the agenda next week if you have comments or things that you'd like to discuss. And then it's going to be filed for publication, and then you will take a vote on it on November 12th. So in looking at our 2025 budget, we have county fund review, and we caught an error that we had thrown in here in the last session when we talked. We had put in our county bridge fund over on the enterprise funds, when actually this is a part of our learning that we're talking about in highway, is that that's a governmental fund until the highway actually does the work, and then the governmental fund pays the highway for the work that they're doing. And so they're an actual enterprise fund, as you can see, along with the healthcare center. It's a special revenue fund, and again, they don't get the money until the work is done, just like a business would be operated. Looking at our percent of levy by department, you can see a breakdown here. Just want to point out at the very bottom, there's the Trempealeau County Healthcare Center. They have no levy, as you've heard many times. I just think that's really impressive. You should be aware of that and know that it's a really great asset for your county. While they are a part of the county and what you do here, they certainly have done a phenomenal job of making an enterprise work and make it successful for the county. As a pie breakdown and looking at it, I always just think it's really interesting. This makes it a little bit more just visible on looking at where the taxes go and how we're supporting each of these departments. So in looking at proposed highlights, the 2025 budget proposal fulfills the mission of the Justice Center project by completing the courthouse renovation, making sure that we take that on and finish that construction, maintaining road infrastructure by investing in road maintenance and construction, the general fund and the Human Services Department return in 2023 about $800,000. We're using about 50% of that to balance the 2025 budget. We continue to use part of the healthcare center principal and interest payments for 2025 in our budget, investing in the human element of the county by addressing a lack of pay increase in 2024 for county employees. And the budget was created from the aspect of sustainability. So over the next year, I'll be evaluating positions to determine what's necessary staffing. And I'm currently doing that all the time, and that's why I'm bringing some of these changes, things to you to consider. And organizational change is really important, especially as we talk about levy limits and what's happening. It's not always easy, but it really is necessary, and I think that the proposals that are brought forward to you tonight are really good changes, and they're smart changes. They really take into account and thinking about this county and using positions to the best efficiency and the way that we can use those. So in looking at, go ahead.
It says here that you are continue to use the portion of the county hospital's principal and interest debt. They don't have any levy limits, so how, is it okay?
So it's
Can
their-
we claim, or why do we claim that?
Yeah, it's their borrowing that we can use, we could use all of their borrowing, interest and payments to use towards our budget, but we're using a portion of that. But we are allowed through law to be able to use our own debt in principle as offset as well as the healthcare center.
Actually, there's no money going back and forth.
No, correct.
Okay.
No. Yeah, good question. So if you look at our tax levy in 2024, we're at $17,669,885.03. And 2025 is actually a reduction, $17,441,231.81. The mill rate then is a mill rate drop from 560 per thousand of equalized valuation to 512. That's a very good mill rate for a rural area. And so I would say that that's very positive in looking at that. And you can kind of see how that impacts the home owner. So in some of
Rebecca?
this, yes.
You say that that's a good mill rate. What are comparative mill rates? Do you have that information available to you right now?
No, I don't, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I could bring that next week for you a little bit. Just a couple of other, one other thing to look at in looking at the highlights. One thing I mentioned the last time we met was talking about, in this budget, libraries are covered at 100%. So I just throw this out there, that is your choice to make. You're required by law to cover 70%. It's a philosophical type of thing. Again, I look at it as our communities are really struggling as well through this levy limit issue. And libraries are hubs of the community and community centers and learning zones for us. So anyway, it is appropriated at 100%. Again, you do have the ability to look at that, and you're only required to fund that at 70%. So, in looking again at budget highlights, we did have an increased shared revenue this year, as well as transportation aids increase. Investment income that came through the treasurer's office, an increase of $375,000, which is a conservative estimate. We're anticipating that actually could be higher. What I'm proposing and is in this budget is that there would be no step increase for wages, but that there's a COLA that would be a 3% COLA 2024 that was missed last year, and then adding the 3% for 2025. There's no back pay. That was a question we had, exec finance. It would be strictly that this would be starting in 2025. It includes a 7.26% increase in health insurance. So, this first sheet that we'll pass out here is data that talks about pay raises that happened across the state last year. And so looking at, if you look at last year's comparables, it's well within reason to say the 3% is, we saw anywhere from about, on average, 3, 4, 5% increases. You know, there's outliers at 2% and 6%, but I would say it's pretty average to say that they were around 3, 4, 5%. Then this one is a breakdown of the health insurance contributions, again, that come from across the state from various counties. Somehow, I think that's, I think it's only one sheet. That's, you know.
Rebecca, are these handouts available to be emailed to me by chance?
Yep, they should be, yep, yes, I forgot that you were not, yeah, you're not exec finance, right?
No,
Yep, I will definitely, I'll email those to you.
thank you.
So, again, I think if you look, we're comparable as far as health insurance coverage goes, and so I just wanted to share that data with you as well. This budget does include the new administration department. You did not fully fund the county administrator in the last budget, so this is an increase there. And departmental budgets, I will just point out, largely, besides the wage and benefit cost increases, are from contracted costs that we're experiencing because other businesses, of course, are experiencing the same thing, where they're having to pay wages higher, their health insurance costs are going up, so in turn, they pass those costs along to us. As an example, the circuit court, they have to bring in more interpreters, and the interpreters' pay raises have gone up quite a bit because of, again, not having enough individuals in that line of work, and so they're able to, bargain for higher prices, as well as attorneys that are coming in to work in the court system, same situation. Fewer attorneys, wages have to go up. All departments are experiencing this with the contractual costs as well as supply increases that we're experiencing. Yep.
Quick question. On the new administration department, what does that consist of? You and a secretary, correct? That's it?
I can show that at the, I guess I don't have that. No, so that includes myself, it's HR, because I'm also HR director, so admin is broad in talking about that.
I'm just trying to figure out how you're going to reorganize.
Sure. So it's myself, an HR coordinator, an HR specialist. I have a finance person in finance, also an HR administrator or administration help, and then bringing in the I'm sorry, I'm trying to think here now the name, emergency management eventually. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. So,
That's quite the change.
Yep.
Okay, well, we ain't got time to beat them up today. And the other question I had was, I caught that in your budget that, when we do bills, you see that, yeah, the translators are extremely expensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's $100 an hour or something. Can we legally use those apps like on your phone? I know we've started using it other places that translate for the people, or do they not hold that good in court? Is that not acceptable in court?
not in court, but certainly at windows and things like that. I don't know, Judge, if you want to just talk about that, or?
That's okay.
Okay, yeah.
I'll step in here if that's okay.
Come to the microphone.
And I'll make my way. I would be cautious. Certainly, your human services and your health department are, they should be using caution when they're using those, because I'm not sure what the confidentiality requirements are. And so certainly, you could be giving all of that protected information into whoever owns that database.
No, it makes sense. The question is still, that's a cost. I can't believe how much we spend on that,
Absolutely.
yes.
And the court system they have a requirement for certified interpreters as
Right.
well.
Okay, thank you.
I have brought this up before, and I guess I think I'll bring it up again. I don't know if anyone ever looked into it, but there are many healthcare organizations that use iPad interpreters, and healthcare industry is required to have certified healthcare interpreters. So I'm sure the certification is different for them than it would be for the court system, for example. But their databases are secure. There are good contracts, and you would not save probably in uh, hourly wages, but what you would save in mileage could be quite significant. I do think it's worth looking at.
Okay, we're back.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that when you talk about your HR department and administration.
Turn your mic on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I always? Here I am. Those people are already there.
Yes.
So it's not like you're hiring 10 new people to be in your office. Those are people that are there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to make sure people understand that.
Right, right, exactly. They are currently there, they've always been in HR, yeah, yeah. There is a little bit of reorganization as far as what I talked about with emergency management. That's a conversation that I've had with the sheriff in the past. That's kind of, we'll get into that a little bit more, but yes, everything else has already been within HR.
Well, Becky, I never implied that you were hiring people all over. That was never the implication. It was just we should understand how it's gonna operate before you actually start, or it gets too far where we just start comfortable with it. And that's all I want, is an explanation of exactly how it's gonna go, because you're taking 2 or 3 departments and putting them all together in 1 or 4. And just so everybody's aware of that. I mean, I think we have to look at it, maybe see if it's gonna work, or try for a while. If it doesn't work, we can just break them back up.
Absolutely,
Well,
absolutely.
And I just want, public doesn't always know how we run, so I just wanted to clarify for whoever's listening in
Yeah.
outer space here that you're not hiring 10 new people.
Right, I think that's a really good point, and I think that's a good point across the board, is there are no new hires in this budget. We're not putting anything new into this budget as far as new hires. There is reorganization, there's using people differently in a different capacity, but there are no new hires, so. Great conversation on both. And so, just moving on then to talking about highway. So we created a special revenue fund to record appropriated tax levies and transportation aids to finance maintenance and construction costs on county highways. This again is working closely with Government Solutions and also with the DOT and what they recommend through the DOT and how enterprise funds are handled. So this is actually highlighted within this document. The fund pays the highway department monthly based on the actual charges for work on county highways. It allows the highway department to operate as a true business type enterprise fund where all costs of road maintenance and construction are billed to either the state, local governments, the county, special revenue fund, or county departments. And it allows for the calculation of an accurate operating income for the highway department. The Highway Enterprise Fund will not have a tax levy going forward necessarily. DOT accounting manual recommends tax levy for highway to be placed in a revenue fund, and all funds appropriated for county road maintenance construction are placed in the Highway Roads and Bridge Fund. And this is what I talked about originally when we were talking about that layout on where funding is. It just helps for creating better transparency, to look at, compared where reported budgeted funds are available for county road work at any time. Any questions about that? Yes.
Could you just briefly summarize what we have now for the county funds and then what the change will be?
Sure. I think I'll let Mike jump in here because Mike Konecki with Government Solutions has worked really closely on the highway funding. Mike, can you take yourself off mute? There you go.
Yes, put my picture up here too, I guess. Okay. Yes, and thank you, Becky, for inviting me to speak on this a little bit. Yeah. So what's happening now is the Highway Enterprise Fund is not really a true enterprise fund. It's a combination of tax levy and state aids that are paid for transportation through the county, and they're mixed in with the Highway Enterprise Fund, which operates machinery, a blacktop operation, other operations. So what the DOT accounting manual recommends is that the tax levy and state aids not go directly into a enterprise fund, but be held in a special revenue fund. And then as the county workforce goes out and does work on county roads, it's a monthly like invoice. It's really just a journal entry on the books where the money is held in the special revenue fund. They pay the highway department. The highway department is even whatever costs they had on those projects are recovered from the special revenue fund. It's this has been in place in many counties in Wisconsin for a number of years. And in my opinion, it makes the evaluating the highway budget, that's the tax levy that the county's paying for county roads, easier to see. You know what you appropriated for winter maintenance, and you know what you spent. It's right there, and it's separate from all the other internal workings of the highway department. Hope that uh, you have any further questions, or do you understand that concept?
Go ahead, Dave.
I have one sort of related to this. That special revenue fund is totally isolated from all other funds and can never be used from anything but highway. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's actually it's an old state law that says monies levied for county road and bridge fund are required or must be spent, I think is the way it shall be spent only on county road and bridge maintenance and construction. Yeah, it's a separate fund. You can't just say, hey, it's got an extra $500,000 in, let's transfer that to the general fund. By law cannot be done.
Thank you. Did you?
I just wanted this new way of doing business. If this gets switched over to the enterprise way of doing what he suggested, we tried for a year or two, we don't like it. Can we go back to the way the system was? Say Neil doesn't like it or the committee doesn't like it. Can we go back again?
Well, actually, again,
Well-
DOT is not recommending that. Go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, there's no, I guess there's no legal requirement in Wisconsin on how a county sets up or a government sets up its fund accounting. I mean, in theory, you could put everything in a general fund if you wanted to, but it wouldn't be, in my opinion, and most people's opinion, that would not be a reasonable thing to do. So these funds are set up because they have different purposes, different accounting principles in some cases. So it would not be recommended, but it certainly could be done. It's not illegal to do it.
You could do it, and I think if Neil wants to talk about it, he can, but I think what happens now is sometimes when you're looking at a snapshot of the budget for the highway, it shows a deficit, which is not true. And you don't want it to look like you're at a deficit if you're running a business, right? I mean, this is an enterprise. You don't want it to look, because it's hard to gauge where you're at in the year. And so that's, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just that, what you were saying is sometimes, we're buying all the materials, it gets buried in, it's there, but you might see it in a negative because we purchased all the rock and we purchased all the oil, so it gets kind of hidden in all the costs. So.
I can, like someone mentioned, I can see where you don't want it to look like a negative, because I do have a little bit of business and supervisory background. And if it even looks that way, I can see where you're coming from. People get excited, so.
Thanks, Kevin.
Does this change the bridge co-aid program or anything, Neil, This,
Separate,
that'll be separate from this whole,
the bridge aid is a special tax.
Right.
Is that how it's worded, Paul, do you know? It's a special.
Yeah.
Tax?
I just wanted to make sure that,
Discussing the COLA portion of it to be separate.
It's a special charge on the apportionment, so it is separated out.
Now, was there some comment made about how this fits in with the levy limits? I thought I heard something about it. The levy limits still apply the same way to this. Right, okay.
Okay. Anything else on highway? Okay. So in talking about new position requests, I did talk to you about this a couple months ago. It seems like maybe it was a couple months ago already. I don't know. It's a long time ago, maybe. Feels like it. But anyway, I met with all department heads that were requesting new positions, had a discussion about that. Really, you know, my discussion with them is saying it's pretty hard to add a position because of the climate that we're in, and I'd like to look at other opportunities to help in certain areas, because there are certain areas, of course, that you have different types of growth that happen in certain areas that they're needing help, where maybe you don't have as much happening in some areas. So my conversation with them is learning, and then also looking at how we might work across our departments, again, on reorganization to make sure that we're getting as much covered and done that we need to, but with the staff that we already have, rather than adding, if we possibly can. There are times, of course, when we need to look at adding. Okay, so, and that's where sometimes we need to make a decision on if we're going to delete, which will come up here in just a minute. So, in talking about the health department, unless that is being funded through external funding sources, which in the health department, we can add this position through grant funds, then we're going to look into receiving those funds and adding this position so that we can, again, take care of areas that were falling behind in vaccinations and helping individuals in the county. And then as well as the district attorney's office, again, looking at, and to the mayor's point, is saying, you know, as a trial period at least, is to say how we can split a position that's already existing, a full-time position within UW Extension as the office assistant. If we can split that position part-time in the UW Extension, and then use that individual to cover and help with the district attorney and the needs that they have with all of the redaction needs that are happening. Now, that doesn't mean that something can't change within the next year, and that things can balance out a little bit better. So that's what we're going to work towards. We're going to see, and there are changes, of course, that may happen in UW Extension. So those are conversations that will continue. But looking at that, that's where I do see that would be a good use of our assets right now as our employees. One other request that I think really bears mentioning is the sheriff's office and that jail programming officer. Great position. We already have someone who works in the jail part-time, working on parenting classes, employment classes, community reentry services, and working with people that are within the jail. And what a great message to think about how they're getting reacclimated and getting into the workforce where we need them in the workforce, right? But it's, again, costs, and while we're bringing in additional funds right now by having additional inmates, we're also increasing our costs by having increased medical costs, by having more people. We're also having increased costs on the food that we have to supply. And it is my hope that there would be a possibility to fund that position through other sources. And so I do feel like that should be something that should be researched within the next year and looked at, and try to determine how we could possibly help with that. Again, these are suggestions made to you, and I bring them to you. If you thought that was really something that you thought we should include, we would need to determine how to do that. So I just bring that forward so that you're aware of that. Questions about any of those? So this is where we move into looking at the elimination of the Director of Land Management position. In order to do that, moving those individuals within that department into managerial roles. And you, as a board, already did part of that before I was here. And you moved the conservation manager, county conservationist into a management role, and the zoning and sanitary specialist into a manager role. So that was already completed. But you've got two others that are kind of hanging out there. And if we're going to eliminate the Director of Land Management position, it's essential that they are managing people. And so we would want to bump them up into that manager role so that we can have that expectation of management. But also to just think about, right now, that team is, I've met with them a number of times and asking, how are things going? How do you feel without this position? It's my feeling and my experience from the past and from their conversation is that this is a good strategic move. Again, elevating them into managerial roles, but eliminating that position. So, and we'll get into that a little bit more about the cost impact of managers. Yes?
When you move these people up to a manager, does that come with a pay increase?
That's what we'll talk about in the reclassifications.
Oh, we're going, okay.
Yeah.
I gotta ask him when I can, or I forgot.
So there was a bit of conversation about the media positions and talking about how we would move to communications as a digital communications. I took under consideration looking at keeping both of those positions because you had expressed interest in that. We can do it this year. You can see that we can keep them in this budget because of the way we were able to set. That doesn't mean that can always happen, but because of the way the situation looks for our budget this year, those two positions under this budget do stay under but under the IT director. There's an elimination of a vacant position at UW Extension, the horticulture position that has opened, and that person left to take a different position, so that position would not be filled. Then currently we have UW Extension Community Resource Development position. This is a position, again, I had talked about and saying we could eliminate. Again, I do believe that because our budget looks as it does this year, that we could keep this position and really hope to build this as a way to build leadership among youth and connecting youth to our county and connecting youth to the area and leadership again, and just so that they are interested in staying local or whether they come back local. It takes a lot of touch points with individuals in order to attract them here, or your easiest piece of the pie to grow your population here are people that are familiar with the area and like this area and have connections with family. So this is a way to plant the seed and working with students and growing leadership development. And then that's UW Extension office coordinator position. This is where I talked about. This is not a new position, but a shared position as a trial with the DA's office. All existing positions and how we're just reworking those. Do you have questions about those?
Question, would that be a 50-50 sharing, or what's the basic breakdown for that? Just try it for a year and see which one demands more time?
So it's a 100% position that's funded by the county. So the UW does not pay for any portion of that one position. So it's 50% to UW that UW Extension has in their budget, and it's 50% then to the DA's office.
So this position previously in the Extension office was still 100% county funded?
Correct.
Thank you.
That doesn't change. It's just being split into two different ways.
One more question. So when you split it that way, does that still sufficiently meet the needs of the UW Extension office?
Currently, it does, so that's a good question, but that's what I am talking, right now, the UW Extension is without their director, and so they are filling that as we speak, I believe. And so, within the next year, we could see that change and hopefully develop programming, like I had stated, with the community resource development position and how that develops with youth leadership. And hopefully, we can see some things change within the DA's office that we might be able to address as well. So we'll work toward that, whether that happens or not, but that might be something that we have to discuss in the future.
One more question too. The previous page, the media positions going to IT, how was that decision reached?
So as a county administrator, I am in charge of organizational development. I worked with the Personnel Bargaining Committee and talked to them about this change. In feeling like, not in feeling, but in many discussions and talking about how the media department really doesn't have a vision for the future and someone leading that vision. And so the move to take that department, which again, a department of two, is kind of isolating. I don't see a lot of value in a director for a department of two. And so that is kind of the thought on that as well. So, in moving that under IT. Mm-hmm.
Add a little bit, it felt in making that decision that the two people in IT would have more support with, in the media department would have more support with Tim as their leader. Having sat in on a couple extension meetings, committee meetings, I just felt like they got lost, you know, in who's guiding them and helping them and, you know, helping them move in a different direction or more, you know. It was me feeling, and I brought this at the personnel meeting, that they just needed more support, so.
If that change does happen, how would the UW Extension and Communication Committees be run? Would they be a change in the committees? Because that would be interesting to see how that would go.
Mm-hmm. Right, because media will be under IT, so it would be more appropriate for Tim then to be working through his committee.
Okay,
Yeah.
then so it would go, so I'm assuming it would come from, if it would pass, it would go from a UW Extension and Communication Committee just to UW Committee, am I correct? in that?
Correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The two positions, is there any reclass in it? Any monies involved different?
So if you're talking about, currently, you have a director and an individual working, you would be underneath a director. So you would have a savings, some savings, not a huge amount, but you would have some savings because that would be brought under another department.
You cut their wages a little, what?
So the director would become a staff member that would equate with an individual within the IT department. And the individual that would actually be communications, digital communications would be an increase. If that individual chose to, you know, have the training and such for that. You're welcome.
There is currently a savings, because one of the persons is fulfilling her duty as a reservist, so she's gone till January.
Correct. Yep. Other questions? Yes.
So what you said, Beck, just so I understand it, one would probably get more money and one would have to take less
Yes.
because it fits the category.
Well, within organization, so if you're talking about, you have a department of two
Yep.
with a director of one.
Yep.
Now, the department of two will be under a different department that already has a director,
Yep.
so you don't need a director.
Yeah, I
yeah,
That guy gets more money, he gets a little bonus.
correct.
So, one guy wins, one guy loses.
Well, and that department used to be very different when there were, I think, at one time, 4 employees. And then it dwindled down to 2, and now there's 1.
I'd like to give a kudos to the current, department, head of that department. He's made due diligence and a position that was eliminated, not filling it. So I think we should give him credit. He never filled that.
Yep,
I think he's done his due diligence to be fiscally responsible.
yep,
So I want to give him a shout out.
yep. Thank you. I agree.
Becca, can I ask you this? How much of a decrease is it in one of the employees?
I'd have to look back again and looking at, again, where the job skills are in comparison to the IT department. That's kind of where, but I can bring that to the next
I
meeting.
just hate to see an employee of Trempealeau County take a decrease because we're reclassifying or changing something. I can see it through attrition or something down the road, but I don't like an employee losing money when they're.
I agree.
When they're part of us, part of Trempealeau County. Just talking.
Okay.
I agree. I think, I never like to see people laid off, and I don't like to see people salary decrease. And I think that's something that we can look at.
Sure. I mean, if you wanted and kept the salary the same and, it's up to you.
Well, I know it's tough because you have to look within the category of its position and pay accordingly, but I'm just saying that why take something away from a current employee? And through attrition, if that employee leaves sometime, well, then maybe it goes into that class.
Okay. Any other questions on that area? Okay, this is just, again, talking about position changes, the information technology, oversight of media communications, also conversations that are happening right at this time. The Health Department Director has left, again, opening an opportunity, in talking about the possible Health and Human Services reorganization, and that individual then would, instead of a Health Department Director, would be reduced to a Health Department Manager. Not a huge cost savings on this, and I've been upfront about this from the beginning. That's not the purpose. The purpose is looking at how you're providing better services and communications across the 2 departments. You can keep the health department separate. That is done at this point in talking with the health committee, Health Department Committee, as well as the Human Services Committee. The feeling is that it would be nice to have the 2 combined as a stronger unit. And then talking about, again, I will go into costs and just looking at those individuals then taking on more management duties, the Human Services Director as well as the Deputy Director, and how those 2 individuals are bumped a little because of that change.
We had a Human Services Board meeting today, and there are, I think, what did I say? You weren't there.
34.
34 or 35 counties in Wisconsin that currently have a Department of Health and Human Services. And it's so much more efficient than having the 2 silos, where there's so much cross work that's done between the 2 departments. So, like WIC is in Human Health Department, and WIC, many of the families that receive services from WIC may also receive services from Human Services. So for me, it'll be a dream come true to have this happen.
I also believe this combination of the departments, I'm cautiously optimistic, because I heard in the past this was tried and it failed, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't know much about that history, but I know this has been tried, so I'm a little bit iffy.
I think it never made it to the departments being together. I think I'm not sure it ever really happened, but.
It's my understanding that it did not fail because of services. It failed shortly just because of administrative on the county board level. change of opinion.
I just don't wanna go down the same.
No.
It's my understanding that services was not the issue.
And sometimes even if something has failed in the past, that maybe the timing just wasn't right, right? Or the right people weren't in place. So can't use the past to predict what might happen this time around. But I know we talked in the Board of Health about being sure that this would be very carefully laid out and done to be sure that, things are merged consciously and carefully. I think this is going to be an excellent change.
But to your point, we want to make sure that we're doing it right. So we are taking our time and making sure that we put all the steps into place and looking at right now in having just an LTE, someone that has some experience that can come in just as an LTE for right now until we can come to committees and make sure that that's done correctly.
You're talking about the LTE for the health department?
Yeah.
And she has been a director of health department in Jackson County and here, and she is amazing.
I agree. All right, so this is talking about emergency management director. So I think, and I shared on this as well, in talking about this position, Sheriff had asked me if I had interest in taking this position under the administration department, because he had said a lot of counties do that. And I said, never heard of it? No, I don't want anybody else. Thank you very much. I have enough to take care of right now. But as we had further conversations and I talked with other individuals, and this was over several months, actually, in just kind of continually talking about it, talking with others. It kind of, and I learned more about the position and talking with those individuals that have most recently been in that and formerly, and it really made sense to think about how communications and your emergency management coordinator would be together and thinking about how we use that position. Again, it's already a full-time position. Let's utilize that individual. They do some grant writing for their own position. We'll use that person to help us with grant writing in some capacities here with the county. So this position becomes emergency management as well as a grant writer, but under the administration department. Same cost, no change. It's just where that person will be and a little bit about what they'll be doing.
Rebecca, this emergency management person are they truly a director? There's nobody under their leadership, to my understanding.
Correct. So it was an emergency management director. It becomes an emergency management coordinator. I don't know why it was a director in the past.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that change. Okay, I
Yeah.
see it now.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that was just maybe the title, I guess. I don't know of any management, anyway, that had been in place.
That changed probably, I don't know how many years ago, it's been 10, 12 years ago. That position stood alone. And then the county came to me when I was sheriff and wanted me to take it. And reluctantly, we did take it. And one of the reasons I took it, because the person that was in it, I'm like, yeah, that's great. So I understand why it's going outside and under the control of administration. I think that's great.
Here's just a slide, Jen, your next piece in the packet is just talking about, as it's broken down across the state, you can see that this position most often is housed with administrator county board area. So again, I was surprised that's not what I came from, but I think it does make sense. Because your county administrator is also in charge of communications, and so this would be a good fit as well as the grant writing piece.
Rebecca, do you mind if I just elaborate
Yeah,
just a little bit?
yeah.
So I just want to elaborate on Sheriff Anderson's comment. When it was brought into the sheriff's office, it was a 3/4 time position. And it was brought into the sheriff's department with the intent of that quarter time piece overseeing the dispatch center. And in 2020, when COVID came around, we had a spike in need of managing, breathing masks and all the equipment that we needed to keep our employees and our inmates and everybody safe from COVID. And it got to be too much for any one person, so we added that piece to the emergency government director's position and took away the dispatch supervision. So now with COVID winding down and we don't have that coordination need again, it could be a 3/4 time position again. And with that being said, we started talking about what a great idea to have a grant writer for this county. And that's kind of how the discussion started then. And I felt that the grant writer piece should be underneath the auspice of the county administrator, not the sheriff. So just a history on that.
I'm glad to see you got support of the sheriff. I was just gonna ask that, but you answered my question.
Remember, he came to me. So, all right, let's go on then to, we've talked about these reclassifications. These were requests, and some that I'm bringing forward, like we just got done talking about. Most of these came from department heads and looking at where they believed there was a discrepancy in how staff are being paid their compensation. And sometimes things get out of whack a little bit, so we looked at, or contacted Carlson Detman to ask them about doing an analysis for us. And it was quite expensive, so thankfully, we have people, again, within that HR department that are capable and could grab all this information and put it together for us so that we could do our own analysis and save quite a bit of money. So in just looking at the first couple of pages, you're looking at child support. There was quite a difference in what was happening across the area, a slight change in some of this. And when you're looking at, we did add a little bit of data because when we went through exec finance, there were some questions about, well, where are they at right now? So this is included in here where they're at currently, and then their proposed wage increase, where that would be, and then with the COLA that we're asking to include. And so, for instance, if you're just looking at child support director, the current wage, currently she's at a grade 12, step 4. In looking at and analyzing that, it was appropriate in looking at comparable wages. We said it was appropriate to say she'd be at a grade 12, step 5. Now, there's some, it's open to interpretation. You have to remember, we're also looking at the years that this individual's been in this position, whether this is a new person to the position or has been there very long, things like that. So, but certainly when we are looking at these wages, we are looking at how because up at the top, I'm looking at that and thinking about La Crosse and Eau Claire counties, how they're skewing it higher, and how we're, to be competitive, if we're not at the bottom, but we're a little bit off the bottom towards the middle. And so that's what we kind of tried to hit with a lot of these. And so if you look through, then the first ones are child support. On the following page, you have the HR manager, HR generalist. Again, these are existing positions. The HR coordinator becomes HR manager. It creates a sustainable structure. You talk about, again, just looking at how we're supporting individuals, looking at how this individual helps with some of the management of the office of admin and where new personnel are coming in, looking at how that's a support position for a position that you've created that's 2 jobs. And you really need to consider for the future of this position and whether you keep it or not and how that moves forward, knowing that generally people don't do 2 jobs because they like to have a healthy work-life balance. So just to think about for your future. And I just say that for this position and thinking about that. So the HR generalist, we're transitioning with this HRIS transition. This person would become more with, doing a lot more with safety training, harassment training, things that we don't do right now, that we have very little and that we're lacking, that we should be doing more trainings with our employees. Move into the finance manager. This is a handout I have here to just, again, when we're talking about organizational development, I just want to make a point in showing this is one position in the highlighted yellow area. This is what that one person did as their position when I came here. And all of the new things that this individual has taken on as this position. And so we can let things stay the same, but I think we're getting a whole lot more value out of this position by all of the things that we're able to do and create with this position. We still had to pay full-time before. We could cut that, or we can grow, the way that this individual is used and still have coverage for what was happening, but also capacity for new things. Questions about that?
Who does this now?
Miss Amy?
So you gotta create. So this isn't really a new job, or is it?
It is not. It is, these are all reclassifications. So these individuals are just looking at different job titles or different steps in the scale to get them in the wage area that they should be. And so in looking at this position as a finance manager, you got to look at who else is doing similar type of work within the county. And so that's what happens as well, is that we're comparing to other individuals to make sure that we're not going too high on individuals that have been here already, or, and you got to look at a number of things when you're looking at this and quantifying that. You have a question?
Just kind of curious, say if this all got approved, all reclasses, what does that come to for the year? The idea?
It is already in the budget, though.
Yep. Already.
This is into the budget.
This is included. This is my budget proposal to you, so yes, it is. These are areas that I think that we are either under, and we're looking at comparables and what these individuals do. So we are actually looking across counties and saying these individuals are not being paid for the work that they're doing. And so I can prove that, I can show that to you across the board, and that's why I'm bringing these to you and saying they need to be reclassified.
Good, thank you.
Same thing with highway. You can see we're just, again, looking to make sure, and again, this individual has been here a number of years and has new responsibilities, new tasks that individual is being required to do, the longevity piece, so that's in consideration. Project nutritionist, that's grant funded. That's a position through the health department. Parks and recreation manager, again, just looking at comparables, we're significantly underpaying this individual, and who's someone who's really doing an outstanding job for the county. Your modernization manager, again, staying competitive. This individual, just making sure that this individual is compensated where they should be, in knowing that it's, the number of years and the, where the type of, and this modernization manager is that last piece in the puzzle to the land management area that we elevated. Two others, this is one of them, and the parks manager, parks and recreation manager is the second one. So those two move into the management position because we took away the director. And then corporation counsel. So again, I just share with you, in looking at, you're just, again, severely underpaying this individual. Last time at the exec finance, we had a question about, is this enough where we've placed corp counsel? It's a valuable position, and that's up to you again. And it's, again, it's an objective type of thing, but looking again at how many years this individual has given to the county was made in consideration. You can always go up in subsequent years, but it was a significant increase from over that where she's at right now, and definitely think it's needed. But you could absolutely tell me that you want it somewhere else on this scale. Yeah.
Yeah, and I brought this, I know, out in exec finance. I think because of what this position requires and how important it is to our county and the experience that our corp counsel brings to the table, I think we should at least be at that average minimum wage.
And we are,
We're about,
we would be above that by $1.50 some.
your proposed wage says 52.45, and the minimum average,
The bottom of the square,
So the proposed wage is just really saying where the grade and step should be. So she's going up a grade and, or going up a grade.
oh, you did,
Yeah.
here. Oh, I'm looking off my old one, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, we made new ones because you did have a good point and we wanted to be able to show. But again, if I would not be an argument with anybody saying that that should be higher. Again, it's a subjective, objective thing that you're looking at a little bit. Again, considering the years here at the county, but we wanted to make sure, of course, that this individual was certainly up from where we had that listing previous, so. But you can see there's room. We could do higher on that, so if, we'll move on. If you have anything else, or if
Well,
anybody.
I would just like to go on record saying that it certainly would be appropriate to go higher, knowing what area attorneys are charging and what they're getting paid. I don't know what the guardian ad litem fee is for court-appointed attorneys doing guardian ad litem work. It's a very valuable thing that's being done, so just wanted to go on record saying that I think it certainly would be suitable to go higher.
So I'll ask then of the board, because this is my budget and I brought it forward to you, but if you'd like to see a change, can I just see a general idea of raised hands, like you'd like?
I don't
Oh,
disagree, and I agree,
Okay.
we're very lucky, but let's take a look at the rest of the budget and see where we're at.
Okay, yep. All right, very good. We'll have that conversation at the end.
Richard Station.
I would just like to say, I'd like to see this go through maybe exec finance one more time, to go through them individually, because some are more than warranted. I agree. We have to keep up, but that's the way I feel.
Okay,
November 12th is pretty soon, you know.
yeah, you'd have to have a special meeting, so.
Maybe we'll have to move in here.
There you go. Okay, moving on, then you have the last three reclassifications where we're talking about these three changes. Information Technology Director, who's bringing on a couple new people, Human Services Deputy Director, and Human Services Director bringing on the Health Department. Questions? Okay, all right. We're going to move on to just talking a little bit more about the budget, because I want to point out, department heads were very careful in looking at how they built their budgets, knowing last year was very tight and did a lot of cuts. And just talking about that and looking at how the more that you cut and the less wiggle room you have during the year, you just have to remember that we get tighter at the end of the year, where we may need to rely on extra funding sometimes that goes back into our general, or that helps us here in taking care of some of the costs that we have coming up. So one change that I just want to point out, a $30,000 savings, almost of rent and utilities. This was again directed by the Human Services Health Department Director, and looking at how we brought people over into existing space for right now, maybe space that's not nice, for sure, we don't have it renovated, but if we can discontinue that lease, that'll save us $30,000 for next year. So I want to just point that out and saying that was a good move in thinking about that, and they've been very, very careful and cognizant in thinking about how our budgets are built. Again, looking at the Human Services Department, so they are bringing in a consultant, Clifton Larson Allen, which specializes with human services departments to find operational efficiencies to maximize revenues within current state programs. There's a potential to save significantly in the human services on, to see human services revenues increase in 2025, because these individuals are specialized in this area and can look at where we might be missing funds. So we'd like to see this also possibly transferred over to the health department to see if there are possibilities there and how we capture more funds that are out there that we may be missing. So I'm excited to see where that goes. Treasurer, this is just information about our savings and the interest that we've gained. Again, conservative, we were talking the 375, we are talking potentially 400,000 or more. In my recommendation, it would be nice to be able to add those funds to the building renovation fund, and then fully funding the HRIS, the financial system that we're bringing in for 2025. That is already partially supported through the health department through ARPA funds. So this would just build that out in paying for a new financial system that would make us much more efficient, again, in how we're handling our finances.
Rebecca, I had a question. Back on the previous page with the consulting firm, do you have information on how much that might cost?
It is $165 an hour. And we're going to save money by, I'm going to work with them directly and possibly the health department, and then we will then in turn train and work with other staff so that we're not paying additional hours for them to do that.
And it's on the books for this year, so we'd be paying it through this year's budget, which is budgeted, so. That's why we want to get it in now, so that we save it for next year, increase our revenue capture for next year.
Again, I like the thinking. I like the thinking in that we're, being proactive and looking at how, we can bring in extra funds. Also, just to go back to the HRIS system and financial system, again, long-term, thinking about how that will make our work much more efficient, rather than some of the ways that we're managing our timekeeping and such right now. So this, you asked about administration, HR, just some things to understand in that budget is looking at employee engagement and MLK Day and making sure that we are taking care of our employees and engaging with them. Working with government solutions so that we get some input from them as far as looking at the suggestions that they brought forward to us and making efficiencies One of the many things, if you remember, their nice little booklet of suggestions, we will start our own internal finance team to take those things and look at them, but it's also continuing to work with them and looking at how we can implement some of those things. Strategic planning, so that we can work as a group to determine where is it that you want to go? What is it that you want me working on? Because if we're not all on the same page, I'm spinning my wheels and working my tail off for nothing. I want to know what it is that you want for this county and where you want to go, because I'm not going to spend my time putting into endeavors that you have no interest in. So I want to make sure that we're on the same page. University Alliance, I think it's important that it's a group that Jeannie, we've talked about before. They work with all of the university systems, and they would work with college students from probably either out of La Crosse or Eau Claire, and would work with us on parks outdoor recreation planning, so that we could take that and put that into action eventually. You need a plan before you can put things into action. We need a plan. So I think it's really important that we start thinking about how we put plans and get the plans first. And then, we're emergency management, economic development, tourism, parks and outdoor recreation, and finance, all wrapped up into one. But county administrators, really, that's, we're involved a lot in economic development and tourism and that piece. Remember, we talked about the importance of growing revenues, our sales tax revenues, our net new construction. If you're not doing those things, you just gotta, you gotta be considering, we're able to make this budget work this year and do some really, really good things for this county. But you have to be cognizant of what's going to be coming. And right now, we're not aware of any changes that are going to be happening to levy. That doesn't mean that things can't change and they can add things or they can add ways of funding sources. But at this moment, we are not aware of any of those things. And I'm just telling you, as a steward of working for you, is saying you need to be careful. I'm not making suggestions just to make suggestions. I'm making suggestions because it's important that you are looking at efficiencies and how to better the government work that we do here. Because it's a responsibility to every taxpayer in the way that we're spending their money. And so I bring these things to you because they are very good ways to move that forward, and at least in a trial period and in talking about that. So one other conversation that has been big is talking about bonding. And I brought forward and looking at our CIP and looking at all the needs that we have that are out there in the next 5 years, and why bonding is important to counties. There's a lot of counties that have been using bonding for a long time because they've been just doing that on a regular basis. You haven't had to, but in order to take care of these bigger projects, you're going to have to now. You can't rely on your general fund anymore. You just don't have enough funds. It's not a good use of general funds. And when we use bonding, long-range planning is available with an ability to determine financing levels ahead of time, combats inflation. Bonding allows for projects to be completed sooner rather than waiting to see if money's available. We all know how much highway construction costs have gone up and vehicle costs increase. Citizens that use the services pay for the services, so you're talking about if you put everything on people right now to pay for a road on this one group of people and expect them to pay for it over the next 3 years, that road lasts for hopefully 20 years. And so we're putting all of that cost on this group of individuals rather than all of the individuals that are going to be using that road for the next 20 years. So that's a reason that bonding is used. Investments can be made that will help reduce reliance on property tax, higher net new growth, stronger sales tax, more efficient operations. Bonding just provides it's also just a low cost of funds. It's lower interest rates for government. to use funds in this manner, and it makes budgeting for operations easier. Borrowing for long-term commitments keeps the tax rate flat, reducing fluctuations. It's an instrument to make investments on road repairs, upgrading infrastructure. We know the need, you've seen that. State law is really, again, on the levy limit piece, is we're just seeing more cities, towns, villages, counties relying on bonding because the levy limit is broken and this is our option. You're allowed to do this. And one thing to keep in mind, and when looking at the debt that Trempealeau County has, almost a third of it is to the healthcare center. So that really makes an impact on you, and just saying a lot of that can be considered as well. Bonding that's already being taken care of by the healthcare center, they make payments on it. We can consider that as a positive as well. So I thank Brian for waiting so patiently, and I'm gonna let him come up. Let's see. Oh, okay.
Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
That's a great kickoff. Thank you. I would say all those things are accurate, and there are certainly more if you wanted to discuss the philosophical aspects of debt financing, especially as relates to local governments. We're happy to do that throughout this discussion. We'll walk you through a few things. Go ahead.
I gotta stop my share, sorry,
Got it.
and then I gotta do reshare. Thank you.
All right. All right. Part of the capital plan for this budget involves a number of projects, I think including closing out improvements to this facility and also road and bridge work. There have been some time where there were periodic borrowings over the course of a number of years of about $5 million related to the county's road and bridge program. That continued for some time. I think this year was a pause. Largely to kind of take a breath, new administration coming in, needing to have these sorts of conversations around the operating budget, which to me is really the most difficult aspect of this, especially as it relates to levy limits. Again, the notion being here that capital financing, general obligation debt, there is no limitation under law. So then it becomes a decision at the board level on affordability, tax impact, et cetera, that all of you need to understand in the context of some of the rules, some of which aren't super punitive, but also how you want to see things going forward. I think there's an opportunity here to also discuss some of the long-term vision versus year-to-year financing and how you want the levy to look on a long-term basis, understanding the capital needs that you might have. If nothing else, it introduces the discussion around prioritization. And I'm sure there's an insatiable need for capital, not just here, but everywhere. But at the end of the day, that is the role of the board, is to help have an understanding of where you want to go long-term. All right, so we can run countless scenarios. What we initially set out to do was to look at a series of capital financings in the amount of $7 million over a 5-year period. And what that really means is, beginning next year, you would borrow to fund this year's capital budget that you're approving, right, for 2025. You'd get the funding to do those projects in 25. When you borrow in 1 year, the first payment on that debt will typically come in the subsequent fiscal period. Just remember that when you're issuing general obligation debt, not only is it from any available source as far as repayment, but it's also a pledge of your unlimited taxing authority. You cannot both levy and collect the tax in the same year, right? So if you issue 1 year, typically you're going to have a payment come due. The first one's going to come due in the year following. You levy for it, then you collect it. Really trying to be conservative on interest rates over current borrowing levels, just so that you can set that one aside as far as how razor thin are we getting on estimates here. We're not, and that's not our nature. We want to be conservative and forward-looking estimates. Your guess is as good as mine what happens 3 months from now, let alone 3 years is now. There are places in between the two scenarios that we've built in this case. And again, having this discussion doesn't obligate you to do anything. It's just having an understanding of if you have a mind about capital financing and you want to continue on that sort of a program over this type of a forecast period, these are two outcomes that you could deploy. One of which is very straightforward. You go borrow $7 million. In both cases, we'd be looking at 20-year debt. You can go shorter than that. You can't go longer than that. So I'm just trying to reduce the number of variables here because we could talk in circles forever about can you do this, can you do that? The answer is probably yes, other than a few things, one of which we can't go longer than 20 years, and you will have to pay it all back by the end of the 20 years, all right? So knowing those two things, we're going to start with two ends of a spectrum. Yes, you do have to pay it back. Even at 0% interest, people still want their principal back, yes. No. And so one of those would be you borrow the money and you make level annual payments of principal and interest over the life of the debt. That would be very similar to what you would do in your own life if you go borrow money for a car or a house, right? You start out with a small amount of principal and a lot of interest, and eventually over time, those two change directions and you're paying more principal than interest, and it goes to zero at the end. Another scenario that you could deploy, and that you've used a little bit over time, depending upon where you presently stood, is having a meaningful discussion around tax impact and then structuring the debt to accommodate that. When we take into consideration what you're presently paying, it'll make more sense here as we look at some charts. We can then look at that and go, all right, let's defer some principal. Let's move the principal amount around so that we're not paying the same every year. And in fact, we're going to pay a little less in an annual payment on the front end than we are on the back end. Now, what that does is it mitigates tax impact, but it does increase overall interest expense. But it is a choice for you to make, and it is an option that you can deploy. And I think you'll see a good juxtaposition in terms of how this gets laid out over time. And so what we're looking at on this chart, this is what you currently look like. This is the dollar amount of levy dedicated to general obligation debt service through your final scheduled payment in 2041. And I'll walk you through a few things here. I did leave on 2023 just as a reference point. There was a borrowing done in 23 with a 5-year term, and that was largely associated with road and bridge projects and some other capital costs that were relatively short-lived. And the determination at that time was to do a 5-year financing, so that goes through the same channels as it always would, right? You go to exec finance and have that conversation that rolls up to the board with a recommendation. The board agrees and approves the debt, and the payments are set. And so you can see where that 5-year issue falls off, right? Start first payment in 24, last payment in 2028 in this case, and then it takes a step down. There are some other debt issues that also end in 2032. And then that steps down. And what you're left with from 33 and beyond is entirely related to the Justice Center financing that was done done in 2021, the payments of which are a little over $3 million a year once you get out to a certain point in time. So that's what you're left with. Now, in reality, will you borrow again before you hit those marks? Most likely, yes. It's pretty hard not to be honest. You can't go issue stock. You're not a corporation. You have a couple of options, one of which is cash, the budget. The other one is using capital financing or debt to pay for capital costs and spreading the cost out over time. And so the line then represents the tax rate for debt service. So the dollar amount is one thing. We can always quantify the dollar amount. That's relatively easy because it is static. You're issuing fixed rate debt. We know what the payments are going to be both next year and 20 years from now from the moment you issue it, unless it is refinanced prior to its final maturity. The tax rate is kind of its own thing and is a function of tax base growth, decline. Decline is rare. It has happened, or stagnancy, we'll call it. It's pretty rare at the county level to go down. You could go have some nominal increases. Lately, it's been good from a tax-based growth perspective. And so one thing you'll note is that even though the debt service at about $4.7 million in 24 and 25 is basically the same, the tax rate goes down. So just like the slides you looked at earlier that talked about the budget, and even though the dollar amount went nominally, the tax rate associated with that dollar amount, the total amount of levy, went down a decent bit. And so the decline in the rate year over year, 24 to 25, is 100% driven by growth in taxable value and what you levy against. What we're doing is we're growing the numerator's staying the same, the denominator's getting higher, and as a result, that drives the tax rate down. And again, that line then, we're holding the value constant over this entire forecast period. We are not projecting any growth in tax base, again, trying to be relatively conservative. Is that the likely outcome? No, but trying to control variables and also not bake into this kind of a pie-in-the-sky approach to tax impact, understanding that, yes, there will be some growth, but if you bank on that, oftentimes that ends up being a poor choice with the benefit of hindsight. Any questions on this one before we move on? You are looking at, the green arrow is really pointing to the budget year that you're entering, which again, has everything to do with tonight's conversation.
Did you create a chart for year 2, 3, 4 to see that's chart like that, what it looks like in year 3 of our proposed capital?
Those two are coming next. So this
Okay.
is just baseline. This is where you stand right now. You do nothing for the next, 17 years? It would look exactly like this other than the tax rate. All right, and so this starts to get into what you're describing. And so, again, we took the $7 million for 5 years, and we built a forecast using just level payments over time. And as you can imagine, what that results in is kind of stacking the columns higher through that fifth issue and its first payment. And then things are kind of flat, and then they're going to decline over time, right? We're adding pretty much an equal amount of debt service every year for 5 years until you peak with the first payment on the 29 issue in 2030. And so if we put some math to it, the levy for debt service increases a little over $500,000, 25 to 26, right? You'd issue in 25, first payment in 26. To pay $7 million off over 20 years would require a payment amount of about $520,000 a year. All right, and so there's also, you can see within the structure, each of those individual issues and where they fall off over time. Again, you still have that big decline, again, largely related to the fact that the Justice Center financing continues, and then we'll end in 41, and we're going past that date. The peak dollar amount in 2030 is just under $6.5 million. And if we hold your value constant, that equates then to a tax rate for that year of $1.90 per thousand only for debt service. All right, so this isn't remember we were talking about a little over $5, something like $5.12 per thousand. If you think about this in the context of that's the bucket, and part of the bucket is debt service, that's how much of your total millage is dedicated to debt service. Now, we're looking forward in time. For next year, it's $1.37 of the roughly $5.12. You can only know with the passage of time what that mix looks like over time. I would suspect in this scenario, it would be growing as a piece of the overall pie because, again, your allowable levy is limited, debt service is not. Any questions on this one?
Can I just comment?
Absolutely.
This is just borrowing $7 million for 5 years, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. The problem that arises is that we build a dependency on raising $7 million plus inflation every year after that, when that runs out, because we're going to be doing that. And I can see that chart would change drastically if you have a total of 19 years of $7 million paid out over, the first one being paid out over 20 years. Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't think anybody could disagree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess the dependency concerns me, and I think David and I talked about that not dependency, but it becomes a dependency.
What I would hope would be I don't know this to be the case. I don't work in the highway department, and I'm not an engineer, but part of this is playing catch-up, I think, with the existing program and bringing the roads to a higher
right.
useful life. And hopefully at some point you get to the place where you're in maintenance mode and you're not in reconstruct mode, but that I don't have great visibility, and you're not wrong, that at some point it becomes infeasible to continue on that path. At what point that is, I would have a hard time telling you. I like to target the tax rate versus the dollar amount, just because it's something that's in proportion to your tax base. Just targeting a dollar amount is hard to do over time, historically speaking, values have trended up, and it's kind of how much. And there are periods of time where they do stagnate, and you have to be careful about that from a planning perspective. And so you can see that the tax rate doesn't necessarily fluctuate a whole lot, but you cannot disagree that at some point, if you're doing level payments, you will keep stacking ad infinitum. The math will generally work out that way until you get to these points where there's the large drop-offs. And we're going to try to take advantage of that a little bit in the
Well,
next
yeah,
scenario.
when that happens, that's going to be a grand.
There are a lot of ways to crack the nut, including interim financing, which ultimately only delays the impact, and then combining things in subsequent years. And so the hard part about some of these things is there are so many variables that we could layer in here. It's not necessarily additive to the entire conversation. So you have to stop somewhere, whether it's 5, 10, 15 years. The next scenario will lend itself better to what you're describing and trying to take advantage of these natural points in time where we do have debt falling off. It is not a free lunch, though. All right, so the second scenario uses what we, from a kind of lingo perspective, would call a wraparound solution. Right, we've got the light shaded blue, that's your existing situation. Clearly there are points where these things decline in a meaningful way. And what we're trying to do is try to fill in those gaps and target them specifically. And so we take your existing debt service. The nice thing about a computer is it can do all the iterative math really quickly, right? And so we just tell it what the constraints are and what we want to do, $7 million a year, and try to get to the same number each year using the dollars that you're already spending, right? And so this is the result of that. And again, yes, if you did this longer and longer, you don't want to have to just defer all of your principal to like the 20th year. That's not a good way to run your organization. Doesn't mean it never happens, but you could do it. I would never recommend you do. So you can see where going from 25 to 26, that the bar grows, right? And then after that, we're structuring. That same dark blue gets smaller the year after when we have new debt. And so some of these you would see that maybe we're paying interest only or maybe some nominal amount of principal, but we're doing it with a purpose. And in this case, it's to try to hold the line on the dollar amount of the levy. And again, we're holding the value constant. So even in this scenario, can you do that ad infinitum? Probably not. But in this case, once you take the first step up, you're pretty stable for that period of time. So you have the $7 million over 5 years, and what we're doing is we're kind of backfilling and taking advantage of those declines that occur over time and staggering the amount of debt service to better manage the tax impact. But as I stated, that's not a free lunch, right? If you're deferring principal, you're extending the life of the debt, and at the same time, then you're also paying more in interest over the life. And then the question to all of you is, what are our priorities and prerogatives? This is very common, so I don't want to hold this out like it's some extreme measure. This sort of a dynamic is played out all the time because there are places that take on capital financing year in and year out to some degree, and they take advantage of these scenarios without getting too far out on the extreme spectrum of really deferring principal for a long time. But in this case, we get to a higher steady state, and you go up fairly substantially initially to the tune of about $1.125 million, but then you peak at 5.8 million versus the higher number in the prior slide. So you get to roughly $1.70 per thousand in 26, but then you stay there over time instead of increasing steadily up to $1.90 per thousand of tax rate. Now the cost of that for $35 million over 5 years is a little less than $1.5 million in additional interest expense. You will only know what that number is with the benefit of hindsight. It is not possible to know that in advance. I wish I could, but you can't. So that's based on current estimates.
This includes the Justice Center, this tax levy?
My understanding is that there are projects programmed in within the $7 million for the 2025 budget, so roads and bridges plus what's needed to finish out the renovations to the building here. So if that's what you're describing.
No, the whole new building, the cost of this new building, is that Is that figured in the payments for this?
The $41 million is in this already. Yes, correct.
That's, I just wanna make
Yep.
sure that all of a sudden you got something lumped alongside.
Yep, yep. That's in your baseline that we looked at a couple slides ago, and if you're looking at this one, it's the light blue foundational bars. That's everything you're levying for presently.
I kinda figured, I
Correct.
just wanted to give clarity though. Never
Yes.
presume anything.
And so there are, again, we could get more extreme and push more things, more of the principal out beyond 2041. That's just going to increase the tab on the interest cost differential. So again, there's so many different ways to slice and dice this. You just got to really start in two places so that all of you can kind of mentally form an image of what this means and that there is cost involved.
Does this formula pay off the shorter term assets we're talking about purchasing in the time that they are of use?
Sure. The easiest answer to that is to think about a chart like this, which encapsulates all of the different debt issues, and just think about it from a one issue perspective. So we can look at, say, the things that are 3 to 5 years and make sure they're paid off in 5. But in order to achieve the ultimate outcome, then we'll take the rest of it, roads and bridges, and which are like 20 years, and then we'll wrap around that part of that individual structure to make sure that the short-lived stuff gets paid off first. But the longer stuff, you do have to play around with the numbers a little bit to achieve these outcomes. So if you think of it that way, yes, it does take that into consideration.
Okay. Thank you.
I just had worked with a client on an issue where we had 3-year, you're talking with the staff and the department, like, what is the depreciable life of this? 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 20 years. And we arrived at a total level payment structure, but within that, you could see where the dollar amount of those short-lived assets were paid off entirely. We've had a few conversations on general obligation borrowing capacity. I'll maybe zoom in just a little here. Yes.
If I may just ask a question.
Correct.
So is the healthcare center bonding in your previous slide, is that in here?
No, because it's not paid from tax levy.
Okay. So I guess.
It's only what the county is levying for.
So I guess I was confused that, so in the initial slide presentation, we're using principal and interest for payments to our budget. Now, I believe statutorily we can do that, and that's been done in the past minimally. And do we know what those amounts were and what they will be? And how does that, if that's not included in here, then it doesn't affect the bonding for, future bonding for the corporation?
Well, that's included, that would be in future bonding possibilities.
The interest goes to the general fund, so there's no dollars being shifted back and forth, but the bonding itself.
Yeah, you're talking about really two different things. You're talking about levy authority in the context of levy limits versus looking at debt structure. I don't have the numbers on how much of that has been used in the general fund budget. I don't have that historically. So I'm focusing only on, when we set the debt out, what is paid from tax levy and what is paid from healthcare center should be thought of as two fundamentally different things. But there is statutory authority to levy for all general obligation debt, regardless of what any kind of underlying repayment sources there are.
And I was just commenting that, the question that Mr. Miller and Mr. Larson had was dependence. So of using that bonding leverage, is that something that if we continue to use that, does that affect our future?
It could. The levy authority follows the debt. So if there's no debt, then you have no levy authority. You will be subject to the allowable levy, whatever that limitation is.
May I just comment, and I don't know.
Microphone.
I guess the dependency I was talking about is that we operate on every year we have to approve a new budget. And we may find that this is our methodology that we use to fund year after year after year. I'm not making a judgment on that, but we may decide, well, years ago we started out, Paul, you can remember, maybe $2 million we budgeted, and we borrowed for just a short period of time. So we started making up for the lack of the ability to raise our levy by borrowing. And so we started low, and we've grown to this proposal of 7 million, which leads me to believe that the dependency to operate the county, this kind of develops a dependency, because this is the way we use to gain monies to fund the county. And we become used to doing it, and it's a dependency. This is what I'm saying. It has nothing to do with the healthcare center. Do you follow me? Nothing directly to do with the healthcare center. But we do have, obviously, we can only borrow up to a certain amount for the total package for the healthcare center and the county. I don't know what it is. It's, say, 130, it's a percentage of valuation.
Total amount you can borrow?
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
that, this slide depicts that, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's 5% of your total equalized value. And
Right,
so
right.
that's not so, it's, I don't mean to diminish that exists. That's less of a constraint than exactly what you're describing. The board needs to determine what your point of view is, and future boards, on affordability, understanding that you can levy an unlimited amount for debt service. You need to all make the decisions about where is that fine line between needs of capital and the requirements of taxpayers.
Just pick somebody.
Dick, all ahead there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Dick. If we're gonna depend on spending 7 million again next year. So
Yeah, and
I
I'm
don't
not,
have a problem with the first year, I don't think, but I don't quite understand making that commitment to 7 years.
I can have a clarifying point there. Is no one is asking anybody on this board, number one, you can't do, there's not really a legal way for you to say we're gonna do 7, unless you go ahead and borrow for it now. You can't bind future boards, so.
You're just showing this
The
for-
ask was, if we look at a 5-year capital plan and we think this is what we need, what does that look like from an impact perspective? And so, again, I have to start somewhere, and so my mind goes to, how do I give you information that you can resonate, you know, and it makes a sense in your head without giving you so much detail that it overwhelms you?
But you truly are showing the 35 million in that payment.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
since you're up here. I'll turn
Well,
it
I was just gonna say, I mean, just, you're showing a 5-year plan so that
Yes.
you know what's existing and what are the needs, so that you can plan for the future, and you can start these discussions and talking about, what are you gonna do? Because there are needs, so there's not a whole lot of options, but this is one option, so we gotta think about, yeah, and so this is, but maybe the state will come back next year and say, we're considering new funding lines, or, you know, changing things, because that is a conversation. And so maybe next year, you know, or maybe new sales tax revenue comes in, and you can say, hey, we don't need to do 7, we can come down on it, or whatever. So that's but it's just showing you, hey, these are the needs over the next 5 years. We could go out 10 years, and just so that you're aware, like, you have facilities and things you need to take care of, and roads and things like that.
The only other thing I'll add, and I know there's another question, so to your point, if you think about it this way, from 2 things from this board, right? Here's just one example, there were 2 of them. If you take out everything other than the dark blue line above the light blue, that's next year's decision, right? That's just, what do we need for next year? Back everything else out. And then secondarily, when we're informed, as your advisor, I can better think about, what do we do with the current issue, right? If you had a mind about, we have a capital program, this is what it says, I know we can't just all agree to do that and bind the next board. You know, what I wouldn't want to do is start on a path and then I don't have information about the future, because I'll make decisions, I'll make recommendations, they're your decisions. I'll make recommendations to you with respect to the current issue when I know what the future is going to look like. And we did that to a very large degree when we knew the Justice Center project was coming. That informed how to structure current year debt. And so we'd look at a number of scenarios, say through the governance structure, exec finance, and we'd say, let's go shorter with the debt because we know we're going to have this larger debt issue and we want to try to make it tax neutral. Because if we would have made it longer, we would have stacked on top of that. And so having a point of view about your capital plan over a longer period of time, even though it's not binding, keeping it updated is informative to how I might think about things and those I work with, and try to set you up for success for the future.
I just have a comment. I think we need to just figure out as a board what's important to us and what we want to do as far as capital improvements. Do we want to do this or not? And there, you all, well, I don't know, not everybody was on the board a few years ago when we looked at, Brian, I'm sure you remember this, we looked at borrowing $5 million for 5 years, and we got through 1 year, and then the next board said, hell no, we're not doing that anymore. So that all went astray. But I think this board needs to make a decision. Are there things we want to do or not? And if not, then we're just gonna let things go. And we'll have to live with that, and the citizens will have to live with that. That's just how I feel. I mean, there are really important, and 5 years ago when we wanted to do this, we were specifically looking at highway. And, you know, probably if we'd have stuck with that, it may be different today, looking at it. I don't know, it's kind of frustrating where we want to do stuff, but we don't want to do things.
I'm in a lot of public meetings, so that is always the rub.
And
Yes.
you're a genius, and I just thank you for sharing.
I am just a conduit for information.
I know,
so-
but you're financial genius. I just wish it would like go into my brain somehow, but.
I like being challenged, but you know, sometimes there's not a good solution. So, to your point, I'll just talk about kind of the calendar of things and where I thought maybe we were kind of running into some problems in the previous, not just the decision-making, but, you know, sometimes coming in the back end of things. And so I know just from conversations and everything you said was accurate in terms of some of the planning aspects associated with the capital program. And what ended up being kind of a bigger issue was just thinking about it practically. And the people I know in the highway department, they need to know how to order commodities, right? They need to know how much money they have to spend. And so we were kind of always on the tail end of that. And then the board, I'm sure, felt like, well, I don't really have a choice now. You did all these things. And so we tried to shift it in the other direction and say, if you're going to talk about it from a capital budget perspective, let's also ask the board at the time that authorizes the capital budget to also put in the enabling or the authorizing legislation associated with the borrowing. Because the first hurdle you have to overcome is a 3/4 authorization of the board. And then when you actually issue the debt, it becomes a simple majority. But at least backing up to the point where you adopt the capital budget, we would work with your bond approving attorney to also have a resolution on the agenda that says not only are we adopting the capital budget, but we are going to authorize the issuance of debt to fund those costs in 2025. That does not put you on the record as issuing debt, but it puts this board behind the decisions of funding the capital budget. And then the debt would be issued to minimize also interest costs too, but then also to help with some of the planning aspect. If you wanted to then proceed with the issuance of the debt in calendar/fiscal year 25, you know, we would do it at a point in time where this board was still in place, and then the funds would be there once the spending starts to occur. So we tried to kind of reverse the dynamic in terms of decision-making.
Well, and I think what's important that we miss sometimes is the whole planning. You know, unfortunately, we do this budget yearly, and we just look at a year instead of looking out 10 years, you know, and that's why we need a good strategic plan. I'm looking at Rebecca here.
I think this is that is the
That is the
intent of
foundation of
starting
this, I'm
here,
hoping,
so you
yes.
have some of this vision, and it will then bleed into these bigger and longer-term conversations, which I would wholeheartedly agree are healthy and helpful from a fiscal management perspective.
Right, thank you.
Go ahead.
Is there a written 5-year plan for us to view?
That was given out a couple months ago, a couple times in meetings, and so, I haven't, but I can email it out again. But that was given out in the big chart paper, color coded.
Okay.
And then we also.
Yeah,
Because I think we've got that first board meeting.
I said, maybe I just need the reminder.
Yeah, it was great, you know, I had to fold it in half.
By department.
Yeah, it did fit in the box. Go ahead.
Is there an advantage to?
Microphone, Dick.
It's on.
Oh, good.
Is there an advantage to now, we can add this to the budget now in November and approve a budget including this capital loan. Is there an advantage for this board to prove or to pass a three-quarter intent to borrow prior to the end of this calendar year?
Yeah, I would say, kind of like I was describing, when you come to the table here again to physically adopt the budget, to have an agenda item, I'd say right after that one, that does have an authorizing resolution as an item of consideration for this board. And so, again, this board would adopt the budget, including capital, as well as adopt a resolution signaling its intent to issue debt to fund the capital items set out.
At that November meeting?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then probably before the board, this is not my decision, by the way, but if you wanted to if you wanted to do that, plus be the board that also takes the matter up to make things final, it would be before the next election, essentially. And the next board is seated.
Just a brief comment. Obviously, your numbers, you're conservative in the numbers on the graph. As far as levy impact, things like that. The only thing that I could say is that given better economic development within the county, I think those numbers could be improved, but again, that's basically hedging your bets. It's not really, it's again, not a guarantee. But that's just a comment I have for the rest of the supervisors. And then the other thing I have is, Rebecca, do you have a copy of these slides that you can shoot us, or? I know it's more of a rough idea because a lot of variables can change that, but when you're looking at it even from here, it's difficult to see
No
the
doubt.
years on the graph
Yeah.
and stuff, so.
Yes, still trying to find the best software tool for those sorts of things. And this one doesn't make it any easier, but it's because you've got a wide range of numbers here, and so I tried to tighten it up, but it didn't work out very well. And so the notion of borrowing capacity was discussed, and in this context, borrowing capacity means a statutory limitation of 5% of your total equalized value. When I say that, I mean at no point can you have more than 5% of your total equalized value in principal amount outstanding. And so your current dollar limitation is 176 million. It's not exactly that, but close enough for this discussion. Your available capacity as of right now is 110 million, or about 2/3 of what's allowed under state law. That includes the healthcare center debt. There's no methodology under state law to net out any self-supporting debt. It doesn't matter if it's paid from healthcare center revenues or if it's a city or village, water or sewer, you name it. You can't do any math to net out. It is an absolute hard and fast limitation. So, but the taxpayers are not supporting that debt. Doesn't matter. It's still GO debt. If we look at the wraparound solution pays off principal at a slower rate, and so I use that as the bogey here for you. If you're going to live, the value doesn't change. You stay at 176 million. You issue and you're paying off in every single year of the next 5 years. You're issuing about 7 million. There are a few years where you're paying off as much as 5 million. What does that do from a borrowing limitation perspective? And based on just that math, you're still over half of what you can do under state law. So that in and of itself is not a constraint. It doesn't mean that you should just go issue $35 million. I'm not saying that, but the question had come up, I think, in exec finances. If we really did this, what would that do to us from a borrowing capacity perspective? And in that regard, I'd say it's probably a non-issue, but I don't take things lightly in that regard either. It's really more about, to me, the levy and what your combined, as a group, what your priorities are in that regard, and the tax rate. And so, having said that, that's a fine segue. And again, there are assumptions and estimates built into all of these charts, and so I just, again, want to say that. And the primary, I don't know why it keeps doing that. The primary one being we're holding tax base constant, and we're using two models that really are apples and oranges, they're not set out the same, because they reach a peak in different years. So in the case of the wraparound solution, you immediately hit the peak, right, for 25 to 26. And the other solution, you stack up higher and higher until essentially it's done with more debt issuance. And so 2030 is the quote-unquote peak. And what we're measuring from is 2025. So on the face of it, it's not entirely an apples to apples comparison, but just to get a sense as to the difference in impact. And I'll equate this to something else as well in the next slide that I think is actually more important, but I am also a taxpayer in my community, so this is important as well. And so if you go from where you are in 25 to the top of wherever those charts go, in the case of the level payment, it's 53 cents per thousand of value, from the $1.37 this year up to the $1.90 that we looked at earlier. And then it goes by dollar amount. If you would, if your property value was 100,000 up to 2 million, what's the dollar impact of that on an annual basis? Not each and every year up to 2030. I'm just saying from 25 to 2030, where it's at the top, that's the difference between the two for those property values. If you look at the structured solution, where we're taking into consideration existing debt, including new debt that gets issued over that 5-year cycle, the peak ends up being a tax rate impact of about 33 cents per thousand. And again, if you look at that at various property values, you can see that there's certainly a distinct difference. There is a cost to that. Again, it's a little over $1.4 million based on these estimates. So you can't achieve that solution waving a magic wand. You do have to incur additional interest expense over time. These are always going to be using equalized values. We don't use assessed values because they can kind of change arbitrarily if there's a reval. All that's going to do is change how the tax levy is spread across the underlying tax base from community to community. So it will not be felt uniformly, but we have to, again, make assumptions. And then just final comments here, and I'm happy to stick around as long as you might need me. We talked about the additional interest cost for the structured solution or wraparound solution and what the potential impact might be in that regard from a total interest cost standpoint. And that's really up to all of you, what your priorities are in terms of mitigating tax impact. There's nothing inherently wrong with structuring debt service to achieve a tax impact outcome. Again, if you're taking extreme solutions, that's where the problem lies with deferring principal really, to the very, very end of a structure. I will say this does not include the potential for a new highway shop, which is currently estimated, I think, at about $4 million over the next 5 years. That really wouldn't change the dynamic in terms of measuring the two scenarios against each other because you're introducing the same thing to both of them ultimately. And again, you spread that over the useful life of the highway shop, which I'm going to assume is 15 to 20 years. Again, we can bake all that in. It would be easier if you told me in this year we're likely to do it, or we can make some assumptions as well. To me, the bigger issues are rating implications. As many of you are aware, the county has really an independent third party that makes a rating assessment. And what I mean by that, that's kind of an assessment of credit quality. Think of it like your credit score, but letter-oriented, not number-oriented. And so in your case, you're in a fine place. You're in the AA category. AAA is at the top. And then within the AA category, there's plus, there's nothing, straight AA, and then there's AA minus. And so I can kind of walk you through the various factors, but debt is one of them. I don't know that the absolute amount of debt is as important for you as how much of your total general fund budget is dedicated specifically to debt service. As you can think about it logically, whether it's a person or any other organization, the more you have in fixed costs, the higher risk that entity is. Doesn't matter if it's an individual or if you're a business or if you're a local unit of government or a state government for that matter. Your fixed costs you cannot change, right, once you're locked in. So think of debt service, pensions, things of that nature. You're going to pay them. And so as they become a larger proportion of your budget, consider that leverage. And the higher amount of leverage you have baked into your budget, it's viewed, all else equal, a little more negative. And so kind of the line in the sand from the rating agency perspective, how they view things is if you exceed 25% in that regard, general fund debt service as a percent of the total budget, that can be a negative credit implication. They'll never tell you how much over before they might start to think about a downgrade, and that's not the only consideration. So it's a mosaic approach. There are many other factors, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point it out. And so you do need to take this into consideration because the rating impacts the cost of your money, right? Just like your credit score would impact the cost of you if you want to go borrow money. And so the higher your rating, the lower your interest cost, generally speaking. We do some math each time we go through this to see if you go up or down, how much it might cost you, how much it might benefit you, and we can make some assumptions in that regard. But it is something to keep in mind in terms of how that looks. That gets back to your point as well earlier about what's the feasibility of just kind of I know we can levy an unlimited amount for debt service, but at some point it will grow to be a proportion of your budget. The wraparound solution better solves for that because it stays fairly stable over time. Your overall budget will probably grow, and so that helps in that regard, but again, that comes with some cost. And so there's always these kind of balance the scales.
I think since I formed the question, I think you kind of answered it, but the 25% level is of the total budget, not the levy dollars in the budget, correct?
General fund budget, not just proportion of your levy. Right. Your levy is one revenue source, right, to fund your general fund budget. So I take both into consideration, but the real one we're looking at is general fund debt service as compared to the total general fund budget.
Got a question now. When it talks to rates, when you borrow the 7 million, is it like a fixed rate or is it a variable rate? So if that rate goes down in a year or two, or do we have a right to say, okay, we're going to take that 7 million and see if we can get it lower?
The answer is yes to a couple of those things. One would be when you issue the debt, it is fixed rate. It's going to be that way, year in and year out, and it won't change. You will get the opportunity to potentially either prepay or refinance, but you're typically locked out for some period of time. It doesn't always have to be that way. But if we go out to the bond market, the capital markets, where right now that's your cheapest source of financing on an all-in basis, especially interest cost, for roughly 8 years, you will not have that option to refinance if rates go down. But when you do that, you also get lower rates as a result because you've guaranteed the investors stream of income for at least a certain period of time. If we just told the market, hey, tomorrow, if rates are better, we're going to refinance, they're going to say, okay, you owe me more in interest because now you've just introduced more risk to me as an investor. So there's a balancing act. But yes, we have taken advantage of kind of what's called the call feature, the ability for you to go out and just refinance. We just did that with the healthcare center debt to save money. And so you'd hope that as you move forward in time, there would be an opportunity to potentially refinance for savings. Generationally, we're still in actually a good place interest rate wise. People hear high rates, that's more in the consumer and bank market, but as governmental entities that, enjoy tax exempt status when you issue debt, I'm not paying income taxes on the interest that you pay me. In the case of a governmental issuer, you get better rates as a result, and intermediate and long-term rates are still pretty good. So if you were to say, Brian, if we wanted $7 million and borrow for 20 years, what rate would we get? Somewhere in the 3.5% range right now. We're not assuming that for this forecast, but if you were to say go, about 3.5%.
One more question. Thanks. But let's just say a department made money. And, we just say, as a board, say, okay, every time that department makes money, this extra money goes into the debt. Can that happen through a budgeting process?
Let's just assume that the excess of, you all need to talk as a board about what you do with either like unspent dollars or, revenue exceeding budget and where that money goes. There's always philosophy and policy baked into that, but let's just assume all the excess just goes into the general fund. Then as you accumulate dollars, if you have debt that is subject to prepayment, you can pay it off potentially.
Well, my thought was if it's set, this department, it makes this much money every month, it goes toward the principal, then there's no way it can go anywhere else. So general fund, that it can be used to here or here. No, let's put it towards the debt. This department makes this money, it goes to the debt. Just a thought.
The board could say, here's how much is in the general fund. We're going to assign this balance to debt retirement. The next board could say, I don't want to do that. I want to spend it on stuff and things. So what you're describing could be a policy prerogative, and you could initiate that as a board to try to set aside a part of the general fund for debt retirement. But again, those are restrictions on balances that a subsequent board could change. Unless you say, we're gonna spend the money now, then once it's spent, you can't get it back. So, you know, any board can make those sorts of decisions, and so you need to make those decisions wisely in terms of what your current fund balance is it enough? That also impacts the rating as well, and if you go below certain thresholds, they'll say, we're gonna reduce your rating as a result, so.
But just in reference to what Andy's asking, I don't think, other than a bond reaching, what do I want to say? Maturity. Okay, maybe that's what I want. There's no prepayment on most of these unless it's written into the bond. The prepayment is.
Yeah. You'll always have something in there, it's just the when. So,
Yeah, right,
there have been
right.
occasions, where, say, bank financing has been equally as, you know, relatively the same rate. Banks, especially local ones, don't particularly care if you want to have this full prepayment privilege. They're not going to necessarily price it differently. But if we go out to the bond market, it would be punitive for you to say, I want this prepayable anytime. You probably wouldn't like the outcome. And so it's more a question of when. There have been occasions where the general fund has been healthy and the board has determined to utilize some of that balance for debt retirement. To me, it's always economics. I try to just boil things down to numbers. Is it cheaper for us to take this cash and spend it on projects and leave our what we perceive to be low interest cost debt outstanding? Because if we went and borrowed the money, it'd be at a higher rate. Or would it be better for us to pay it off because we can borrow lower now, but we can't necessarily, you know, there's going to be points in time where you need to make certain decisions based on economic outcomes as well.
Any other questions?
John,
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I kind of agree with Dick. It scares me a little bit because after that 5 years, what do you do? Because this initially started out as a $5 million project for the highway department, for the roads, and all of a sudden now we've got $2 more million for capital projects. And then it kind of bails out it puts more tax burden on the people, and it kind of, all of a sudden we've got these projects that, what's going to happen in 5 years to balance the budget? Because you'll take some things out of the budget now and you're going to use it for capital expenditures. And when you get to that point, it just worries me that what are we going to do that we are dependent on this to help us balance the budget or help the budget so that we can live by the limits that Madison puts on us for our budget. I just think that's what we started out with. I think it's important to get our roads fixed so that the people in the county have decent roads that we haven't put anything in for years. Up until the last couple of years now, they've started again. And the safety of the citizens out there and their kids when they're driving, I think is priority. I'm big on the $5 million for the highway. The rest is a little bit. Can you make it like for 2 years you can go $7 million and the other 3 go 5?
We can
So
only
you're
go
not-
a year
I'm
at a
just-
time.
What?
We can only do 1 year at a time.
But can you change it as we want every year?
Just because you have a capital plan does not obligate you to borrow for anything in the plan.
We're just
So
gonna go year to year in this then.
the borrowing kind of has to be, you know, even if this board adopted an authorizing resolution for $35 million, it is not issuing debt. All it does is get over one hurdle in the statutory process, and it gives you a 5-year window to then issue that debt. And the intent would be that this board would adopt an authorizing resolution for next year's capital budget, whatever that number is, not what's set out here as $35 million. So I don't want anybody to feel like by presenting this, you're somehow hemmed in to making decisions. It's really more about all of the things you described. On a long-term basis, what is sustainable? Because my thought is you're probably going to start to pick that discussion up next year. As soon as you're done with this, I'm going to guess that's probably the next place you're going to start, is looking forward a number of years. And so this kind of frames the discussion and allows all of you to have that conversation. It's more about, we have capital items from this year's budget. We have capital items in the budget for '25. If you adopt that budget, then this board would also then have an item on its agenda for an authorizing resolution related to 2025 capital projects. What you do after that comes to the next board, and then the board after that, et cetera.
Thank you.
But we don't have to do anything,
That is
right?
correct.
We can just say, yeah, we don't like this idea, we're not gonna do it this year. But this is not money to balance our budget. This is forward-thinking, what do we wanna do in the future, maybe.
I would separate the notion of what's funded from your allowable levy, right?
Right.
Whatever operating in capital, capital is getting close to zero in a lot of budgets for all the reasons that Rebecca described. And it's kind of shifted more to borrowing. And so you've got people and operations that you need to fund as a county, right? The capital is kind of fungible. So if we don't want to do however many $1 million for roads and bridges next year, then you just take that number out and then you're balanced, right? So the balancing act is the borrowed proceeds are the funding mechanism for the capital items that are discretionary on the part of the board.
Right, and we did that before.
Correct.
We borrowed 5 million, and then we had talked as a board, looking in the future, 5 years, we were gonna do it, and the next board said, no, we're not. So we didn't. So the highway department didn't get that money.
Yep, you just don't want them in a position where they start to spend the money and then you don't borrow because it's gonna
Right.
get paid, it's gonna get
It-
paid
it
for,
got
it's gonna get
close
paid
to
for out of
maybe that
cash.
happening.
Right, so.
Food for thought.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you all, you were very patient and I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where does he live?
Did you have any closing comments, Rebecca?
I would like to make just a
Go ahead.
quick comment. I would encourage the Executive Finance Committee at the next meeting to seriously discuss the idea of putting this on the agenda for the November meeting, the intention to borrow, as he has suggested. And maybe you're thinking about that anyway. But I would encourage you to do so. And I guess at this point, I would say at the rate that's being suggested, because during discussion, if we want to modify that, that can be modified at that time. But to go ahead and put it in at the amount that was recommended at 7 million for this upcoming year. So that's just a suggestion for serious thought.
Yeah, it's something to think about. We got just a little over a month. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we have to get together with Becky on the capital here and make that final decision. I think the rest of the budget, I think, at least in my opinion, we're gonna be pretty close. But we definitely have to go through that capital and see where we're at. And do we wanna do that next Monday?
It's up to you. Is that what you'd like to do, is look
That's
through that
not-
again?
You mean at our regular board meeting?
Well, we have to give her direction for our November decision, I guess.
So we got this on the next,
Or would you rather exec finance come up with a number?
A number for what? I don't understand.
For the
your-
capital.
The capital.
Like there's 5.3 million on highway here.
Oh, okay, looking
I
at the
might,
capital
I might not
projects.
agree with that, so I don't know what the rest of you are gonna think, but
I would be in favor of just what you were talking about, just put it on the agenda and we can decide or not. I mean, I don't think we can, in the November one you're talking about.
No, we have a meeting next week, Monday, and then the budget needs to be published.
Right.
So if next week, Monday, we could have discussion then regarding everything here, and you could give some more, you have some time then, a week, to look at the materials again. I'll email everything out, what Brian sent. And then I'll bring the CIP, the borrowing information again, and so we can go through that. And, you know, I'll look for direction at that point from you a little bit more.
I would suggest if you have another meeting, executive finance, that you bring Neil in to talk about what his plans were to the highway department and what the funds are gonna use for it. I think he's got somewhat of a plan, I wouldn't ask him now to get up and speak without reviewing, but I think that's important to listen to him too a little bit than
Oh,
just saying.
absolutely.
So,
And we've done that, and exec finance has at least one, maybe two people that are on highway and kind of keep us informed also, so.
So we could have that as part of the discussion next week, Monday, so if those individuals are here to talk about their projects. Any other questions for me? All right.
Everybody done.
I know what I do with it.
Rebecca, did you get a chance, Rebecca, did you get a chance to look into my request yet? In regard to that money out of the general fund?
Paul, talked to Paul about that. He said he's not familiar with that. The question about the resolution for the general fund, I talked to you earlier today and asking about,
For designating the general fund you're talking about?
correct, using general fund, the overages from the general fund, or from 2023 and using that. Did you say there was? Oh,
I
okay,
brought it with, just in case.
okay.
That was the 3,488,998.18. That was designated towards renovation.
No.
No.
That's not, we're talking about last year at budget time, where we by resolution took two or 2.5 million and.
From the general fund and gave to
And
highway.
forwarded to highway and for the next year, so that our budget did not show we were using that money to balance our budget.
I didn't bring that resolution with, but that was a resolution that was passed to transfer from general fund.
So we did
to
it then
highway.
last year, and we could do something like that again this year if we find the right place for it.
Well, you got a copy of the
We're already-
general fund balance, you know, you get one of those, everybody gets one every month.
Yeah?
I don't remember what we're at, we're at 3 million something, 3 million.
It's close to 4
But,
million, wasn't it?
but in
Yeah,
her
no, it's just-
anticipated
it's
revenues
very
in the
close
full
to 3
budget,
million,
she's
so
showing
it's-
400,000 coming out of that to balance the budget with. And that's my question. I'm not
That'll
concerned.
come away from that 3 million, yep. To balance the budget, it'll come away from the 3 million that's in the general fund right now.
That's in the general fund, right.
It's more like 3.
And what I'm saying is. based-
3,069,000, what sticks in my head.
Based
but-
on last year's situation, when we looked at the asterisk at our credit rating, and the reasoning was we used money from the general fund to balance our budget. So
We didn't use any money from the general fund to balance our budget for 2024.
Correct, but we took money in '23 from that fund by resolution and designated it to highway for '24 use.
I think we did it after the first of the year, didn't we?
Well,
Well, anyway,
whatever, but that's what I'm looking at, to not use this 400,000 out of the general fund because of our past history with our credit rating showed an asterisk by our AA rating. And the explanation, one of the explanations was we used money from the general fund to balance a budget. And I'm trying to avoid that in some way, shape, or form.
okay, if you do that, you're technically, to balance this budget that Becky has,
Yeah.
you would use more of the healthcare center's debt to balance the budget.
So why didn't that work
Dave
2 years
Dave
ago?
is just asking, do we need a resolution in order to,
Move it out.
to move that forward,
Rather
to
than
take the
just use
general
it in the
funds?
budgeting
Right,
process.
Right, so that we're not.
That's my concern.
And I
that's-
think in just talking with Brian, it's more that those funds are used for capital investments rather than the our general budget.
Right.
And so we would be fine. I'm not, and again, there's no rule that says you have to have some type of resolution, but I don't know your process.
The resolution now you're talking about is using debt to cover the balance of the?
No.
No? Okay, then I'm
Okay.
confused on what you're.
If you look at the page 4 of the proposed budget,
You're on the
Jen-
long sheets, right?
on the long sheets, yes. Talks about general fund applied. And it says, over here, 400,000 to reduce the tax levy by that much.
Yes.
And if that's coming from, the general fund is the one
The
that
general fund is balancing the budget.
And I'm saying, do something to bring that out of the general fund prior to the end of this year and into whatever fund it's legal to put it in, so that it doesn't show that we're using that money to balance the budget.
You would have to reduce budgets by that amount.
Some way.
400,000. Where's
And
Becky?
fund something with that money someplace else that's in the budget.
Where's the line? Where's the line you're talking about?
Yeah, go for it. Exec finance, you can
It's on
figure it out.
page 4.
We did it last year.
No, we didn't use any general fund last year.
And you're bringing this up right
No,
now?
I think you're misunderstanding what Dave is saying. Dave is saying, last year, you did a resolution to say we can take the money from the general fund to use it, and that helped with whatever rating you're talking about. That's
Oh.
what Dave is remembering, and so that's what he's asking about.
Okay, that had nothing to do with the budget then.
Okay.
That was nothing to do with the
No,
budget.
it
That
took
was
this
in
money out
addition.
of the budgeting process and paid for it from the general fund. I'll call it ahead of time, and we didn't transfer the money till later. But by the resolution, it came, that amount of money was found in the general fund earlier by resolution to some project.
And that went
Dave,
to highway.
Dave, are you, yeah, I was gonna say, are you recalling when we had to move money to highway because they had, short budgeted in themselves?
No.
That's different.
No,
That's something
this was
different.
what they were given for, this is the 2 million that was by resolution taken from the general fund and given to highway for road construction in 2024.
Yep.
Okay? Nothing to do with the budget. That was totally separate. So if you took it out, if you think you took something out of here to give them the 2 million, no.
No, I'm saying we did that for highway. We did it, and it was outside of the budgeting process.
Yes.
So why can't we do this
General fund
400,000 some way
Is that what he's
outside of the
talking
budgeting process?
You're gonna have to reduce expenses.
That's not what he's talking about. Well, let's
But
talk.
he's talking,
No, he's
yeah,
not.
but I know what he's talking about, when he wants to take this 400,000 away from your
No,
fund balance applied.
No, you say.
He wanna move
I
it.
think what Dave is saying is that he wants a protection of a resolution in place that's saying we're using this money, but that won't help, that won't.
And 24 for some capital
Right.
thing someplace.
Right, so that it's not the period, so, again, I'm not sure why you needed to do that, but, yep.
And we,
Yep.
When you publish your budget, it has to show all of the funding sources. You will have to have a line item that will say where that money came from.
yep,
It has to be in
But
there.
this, if we do it this year, that's not a budget.
It's for, if you're using money to support the 25 budget, it will have to be in the loss from all sources, and that would include an
Yes.
appropriate, you have to set out all your balances have to be stated, then all of the revenues and expenses, and how you're supporting those costs. All the funding sources also have to be in your budget publication. That's all I had to say. As far as policy prerogatives go, you could, I think to the point I made, you could do a resolution. I don't know that it's needed, but I'm also not an attorney, so.
And the only thing I don't want this.
Everybody will have to
This is
see
your need.
exactly where the money's coming from and where it's going when you publish your budget. It'll have to be in there.
Right.
Paul was just
But
saying
if-
it's gotta get in the paper Friday.
I have to have to the paper Friday, so it's.
Next Friday.
No, this Friday.
This
It's
Friday.
this week Friday, to make the 15-day notice. It's gotta go in this Friday. So I've already sent it to the auditors. So if we're gonna change something, it's gotta be changed on the county board floor
So-
in November.
Right, which is normal. That,
Yep.
this is the budget that the county administrator's bringing forward. If you want to make changes, that's the appropriate thing, and I thought we had a little bit more time, so I was saying I could work outside of that if there was a majority of individuals that wanted to change something, but the proper, the venue is on November 12th if you want to change things. But we can talk before that too, and so we can have discussions.
This is
before
the
that.
problem of having a weekly newspaper. That's, because 15 days, and then we gotta go.
Oh, right.
And because we're on a Tuesday, 15 days comes back, and the paper comes out on a Wednesday, you gotta do it the week before to make the 15-day notice. But I still got a question then, Dave, if you're saying we wanna take it out of fund, general fund applied, and you wanted to see it someplace else in this budget,
That's, yes.
I don't know where it's gonna.
Other than showing that money was taken from the general fund for whatever the purpose.
I don't know where you'd put
You're
it.
just hoping that that'll help our ratings, is all you're looking
Right, yep. Because we're looking at borrowing money for 5 years straight is what we're talking about. We lose, Brian can maybe help me out. Is a one notch lower in the credit rating a big deal, or am I
Oh, yeah.
way too worried about?
Interest.
You know, I don't, this needs to be viewed in context. I don't know what the current balance is. It would be best to think about what is it gonna be, give or take, by the end of the year. I recognize you're one giant snowstorm away from affecting that number, but, or maybe a few. But it really depends on where you would end '24. And we could make some assumptions and estimates, because you can't just say 400,000 is a credit negative. It's really, then what are you left with at that point in time? And so we can make some assessment around that. It also, if you're doing it for operational purposes, now you're structurally imbalanced from a budget perspective. If you're doing it for capital, you said yes to the capital this year, you don't have to say yes to the capital next year. So there are distinctions in terms of how you're allocating that money, and then also what is going to be the general fund balance once you make that decision. Those are the two important pieces that I would need to know to give you an estimate as far as rating impact. Other than, I can tell you the higher balance is better, lower balance is worse, but it depends on what we're measuring against.
$800,000 to the general fund, so just take it out. Something like that. Bring that up at exec finance. No.
Calendar, I'm so bored.
Let these poor people go. I don't think so.
Are we gonna have to meet again before Friday?
Yeah. And that's
Or
okay,
is-
we'll get there.
Are people prepared to let this thing go to paper?
Couple more, finance meetings.
Yeah, he didn't really answer that question either, did he? He didn't really answer that question.
Okay. Stacy had the paper. Our general fund balance right now is at $3,052,911. So it's $3,052,000.
So that'll bring it down to 2.6.
Which will bring it down
to 2.6.
400. Yeah, 2.6.
Which is still,
Well, and exec has always wanted to make sure it never got under 2. So
right.
At 2.6 at this time of the year, we should be.
There's no
Unless
other
something
questions.
catastrophic happens.
There's no other questions. We have, you got a handout tonight for a meeting on the 16th, Wednesday the 16th at 5 PM.
Yep.
That's a virtual meeting. And I'm sure you'll have it on your computer to pick it up. And also the meeting next Monday night is at 7? 7 o'clock.
Monday, yeah, this
Yeah.
is Wednesday at 5.
Yeah. Okay. If there's no questions.
John,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you clarify for me, there's a meeting on this coming Wednesday at what time?
5 PM. It's a virtual meeting,
Virtual.
similar to what we had,
Closed session.
closed session meeting.
Last week.
Similar to what we had last week.
Tell her she'll get a link tomorrow.
You'll get a
Sure,
link.
sure, I just don't have.
You'll get a
I don't
link in
see
your
it my
email.
calendar.
Tomorrow.
Okay, it hasn't been sent yet.
Dawn,
Got it.
the letter, the memo says you'll get an email tomorrow with a link for the meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
No other questions? We can adjourn at what time?
8:35.
8:35.